Welcome to the Commerce Tomorrow podcast, your one stop to learn about the technology that's powering the future of commerce. Here are your hosts, Dirk and Kelly.
Hello, welcome to an episode of Commerce Tomorrow. This is your host, Kelly Gage. Unfortunately, Dirk Horig is unable to join us today. I'm here with Peter Sunna at Contentful's headquarters in Berlin. Welcome, Peter.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Peter, do you want to give the audience a quick background, what you do at Contentful, and how did you get here?
I'm Peter, and I'm head of product here at Contentful. And I come from Sweden, so I grew up in the north of Sweden. So the true element, snow, cold, and darkness. That's what I really love. I fell in love with the web and the internet really when I was doing my studies in the late 90s. And I was playing football at the same time, and the football club wanted a homepage. So back in these days, everyone should have a homepage.
Yeah.
And I was tasked with that since I was the only one with a technical background in the team. And that's how it all got started. And I developed a small CMS who was powering this homepage that eventually turned into a company that I ran during my university studies that was then selling, creating homepages for different businesses in my hometown. So that's how it got started. And eventually, I ended up in product management, and since I was working as a consultant for quite some time to mostly once again related to internet and content and how you manage content for global enterprises, and that led me to a company called Episerver, and that's where I started in product management. And the good thing was I was tasked with to re-platform Episerver based on really the iPhone was launched, which I think was a big disruption to web content management, which was very much focused on the web, right? And all of a sudden there was a new device that everyone had and started accessing the web with, and they realized that there were new requirements that started popping up, and that became my first really big project as a product manager. Lots of learnings around, how to re-platform an existing product and how to go to market with that product. And I think the main learning for me was really in terms of, you think you have something that's so much better. You've been working on it for 2 years. Back then it wasn't really this agile iterative cycles. It was more these bigger releases. And we went to market with what I thought was a superior product, but still it was challenging to sell it and also to convince existing customers to start to use it. But really then working with the go-to-market strategies, and eventually we overcame that barrier, and the new Episerver version became successful, right? And but that's how I came into the product management, and how did I then get to Contentful in Berlin? The reason was I went on paternity leave, and I told my wife I want to do something completely different. I was sick and tired of content management, and I want to think during my paternity leave what to do next. And it happens that Sasha contacts me. So Sasha is the founder of Contentful, and asked me if I want to come down to Berlin. And I come down to Berlin and have a workshop with him and Paolo, which is the CTO and the other founder. And they really sell me on this vision, and this was something I wanted to be part of. And that's why
Contentful was small. I mean, it was what you said, a 30-person company when you joined?
Yeah, 30 people. A really strong vision already back then. And Sasha had created Contentful really to make what he said, make content programmable. And how can we really enable content to work for developers as well? And I think this was really the foundation for Contentful to make developers happy again when working with content.
Yeah, and I mean, Contentful has just had a meteoric rise. We were just talking on the way over here. I mean, how many people are you up to now? How much have you just raised?
Yes, now we're around 200 people. We have an office here in Berlin, which we're currently at, and also an office in San Francisco with around 50 people. And we just raised a Series D with 33 million, and in total we've been raising about, I think, 73 million.
Yeah, that's just phenomenal rise. It's good to see, and just for the audience's benefit, a lot of folks look at Contentful and Commerce Tools as quite similar products, just in different spaces. We're both API first, headless, disrupting a fairly established legacy industry. So whenever you raise money or get a good customer, we're always cheering for you.
Yeah. I mean, the same thing for me. So when I see that you're making a good entrance in an analyst report, etc., I'm also something that's I'm really glad to see that.
Yeah. So on that topic, legacy platforms, platforms like Episerver and some of the more legacy CMS vendors out there, they've all added APIs, right? And we see the same thing in the commerce space, right? We see IBM and Oracle and SAP commerce products just taking their legacy on-prem solution and they throw an API on top of it. But you've always been headless. So how do you? Why are you different than a legacy monolith with APIs?
Yes, I think with Contentful, on one hand, as you said, we've always been headless, which is bringing lots of advantages, especially how fast developers can work with the technology that they choose for different initiatives, right? But another thing which Contentful has, from the start, Contentful was cloud-enabled, so being cloud first. And I think if you have an architecture that's really working well in the cloud, meaning multi-tenancy, and I think that brings so many advantages in how fast you can move as a company. So how fast can you start a new initiative? How can you connect a content repository to that initiative, launch your first website, invite new team members working on that specific initiative, right? And then how do you create your next initiative? And maybe there's some connections between those two different initiatives. And I think this is really where I see the power of these cloud platforms compared to many of the legacy CMSs, which have a big complex product, which is usually moving very slow. So even bringing, an API on top of that is not really enabling these type of use cases that we see, that companies that have digital teams that want to move fast, want to experiment, how can really enable those teams?
Yeah, no, I could not agree more with you. Multi-tenancy is huge. Cloud first, it's a very different world that these newer platforms like ours inhabit, and you just you can't put lipstick on a pig, as they say.
True.
As nice as the lipstick might be. So who are some of your flagship customers, and where have you really found niches in the market?
Yes, I think what's interesting with Contentful and our customers is I was expecting when I joined Contentful that mostly startups would be attracted by our model, right? But we started to see a big impact among larger enterprises already 3 years ago, and now we see an even more impact, right? But I think the reason for that is many enterprises are also going through the digital transformation, rethinking how they are putting digital at the center of the company and how they need to be structured in terms of teams and processes around that, right? And I think that's the reason that we've also been able to, get into these bigger enterprises, right? And then the commonality we see is really that they're thinking in terms of teams a lot, that cross-functional teams on a mission that want to, have a clear goal. That might be a specific goal in terms of selling more, if it's a commerce integration, or it's a specific conversions or customer experience that you want to build, right? And these digital teams can really be powered by Contentful and other types of services where you want to you really select the technology that's fitting best for the job, right? And that's why we see that we're making everything from startups such as, and now I'm saying startups, I'm thinking Spotify and Lyft, etc. are using Contentful, to bigger, more classic enterprises such as Urban Outfitters and TELUS, a big Canadian telco company, and the British Museum, etc. But all these companies are rethinking a little bit on how they work with digital and technology.
And what I like about this model that you have is, as a customer, I can try out Contentful for free. If I don't like it, I don't have to pay anything, right? And if you have legacy old school software, there was a big upfront purchase required, and you'd have to spend millions of dollars. You'd have to get an app server, you'd have to get connecting middleware, a database, infrastructure. It was a really big deal to do that.
Yeah.
And now in this new cloud world that we're in, whether it's AWS or Azure or GCP, and then you have all these startups I shouldn't even say startups, right? We're established companies at this point, but you can just go buy a service, try it out. If it doesn't work, you don't have to pay. And that really lowers the barrier to adoption, which I think is underrated out there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's also where these digital teams, I think the new way of, previously we were looking at, these big RFP documents, which have all the requirements for the system, and then you did an evaluation. Eventually you might do the proof of concept to see if it was fitting all these requirements, right? Yeah. And now we'd rather see companies coming in and do a small first initiative. which is usually not the business critical one. It might be more experimental, etc. And see if that's successful, they can slowly start using Contentful or commerce tools for other types of initiatives, and that's the way for us really to grow inside these companies.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with you. So business users, people at organizations are often business users, and business users have a difficulty in buying APIs because there's no tooling for them to see. So what do business users use with Contentful to manage page layouts, drag and drop WYSIWYGs, that kind of thing? Like where's the head? There's got to be something there that business users can use.
Yeah, and I think a common misconception is that we don't have a head, therefore we have no UI for business users. So yes, we have what we call referring to as the web app, which is where business users, authors, editors, marketers, customer success, whatever type of persona that's working with content. And I think that's one thing with content management. There are so many different roles and persona that is working with content across a company. Yeah. So there we have the web app, which is really then enabling users to manage their content. And another misconception I would say with headless is that there is no way to preview the things you're doing. And for us, it's more like how can we build up, so when you're working with content in a structured way, we want that content to be separated from the head and from the delivery, right? But it's also very easy for our customers using the built-in functionality to provide these bridges. So for example, when you're creating your own head or your website, you can inside our authoring environment create a direct link to preview your content with your own head. So this is definitely an area which we're also working with improvement, in terms of making it more real time, thinking more about how we can connect better layout management to your specific head, etc. Yep. So definitely a big area where we're also making improvements.
Yeah. And for those who are building their front ends from scratch, which I guess is most of your customers, what are some popular front end stacks that you're seeing?
So it's usually the classic ones, such as React is very popular, and we see the whole. JavaScript is definitely one of the main languages that many of our customers are using when building their heads. Mm-hmm. We have seen, for example, Gatsby.js becoming more and more popular among developers. We see in terms of hosting, we see Netlify also coming up a lot in terms of creating that what we call the full stack for a website, right? Then we also have many of our enterprise customers who are using more I wouldn't say old school, but Java and .NET and building their heads on top of that. And we've also been very careful in terms of making sure that there are SDKs for these type of technologies for you to be able to build your head.
And do you ever see any of your customers use you in conjunction with a more legacy DXP or CMS, like an Adobe Experience Manager? And do you ever see your customers combine the two, or is it Contentful or a legacy platform?
Usually it's a combination, and as I said, that it's very seldom that we come in and the company decide, we're gonna select Contentful, so we're throwing out all the other systems, and now we're building everything on top of Contentful. So it's rather, as I said, the first initiative is on Contentful, and then when that's successful, it's scaling out from there. Which means that in many cases we're definitely working in parallel with many other systems. Mm-hmm. We can see that some of the customers we're having, they might start with, for example, microsites or marketing microsites on top of Contentful, mostly because they can move really fast with that. Mm-hmm. It might be that they're stuck in an existing solution, and then they're starting to use Contentful for the fast-moving initiatives, right? Yeah. Other examples are customers are using Adobe Audience Manager to manage their customer segments, etc., and doing personalization based on those. Mm-hmm. So definitely, tying into other type of marketing functionality when creating the experience.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and we see the same thing. It's not like somebody just swaps out WebSphere Commerce for us. It's a gradual process. It takes some time. Those big bang projects are a sure way to get fired in a big enterprise. Something we've at Commerce Tools been really excited about is your embrace of GraphQL, and like you, we have embraced it as well. Can you explain to our listeners what GraphQL is and why did you adopt it, and what are some common use cases? What % of your customers use GraphQL? It'd just be good to hear more about that topic.
Yeah. So on one hand, one of the main strengths of Contentful has always been the APIs that we've been providing in terms of the RESTful APIs and what developers can do with that. And then we start, GraphQL is coming from Facebook, really working on complex graphs and complex content graphs and how you can find relations between those, right? And we therefore decided really to start with some early prototypes for GraphQL. So it started with an open source project that we built on top of our existing APIs.
Okay.
That was the first experiment, and we saw a big uptake of that in the market. There's lots of interest around it, and that's why we really decided to also support GraphQL in our delivery APIs and preview APIs. And the reason for that was that really we see that GraphQL might definitely be a future way of querying your content, and it's also a way to standardize how you query content across many different services. Mm-hmm. So instead of having to query commerce tools and Contentful and maybe some personalization and profile store, you can actually have a bridge, which is one way of querying all these different systems, right? Yeah. Which means it's much more effective for developer to come to really gather the right type of content when building up a website, as an example. Yeah. So on one hand, we see GraphQL is really popular among the individual developers and the developer crowd, but also enterprises started looking into this for a way to them to standardize how they're querying all their different services and microservices, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So something we've seen with a couple of our customers is Prisma. So Prisma is a GraphQL layer on top of a traditional database. Where would that work versus where would somebody need a real headless API first CMS like Contentful? For the headless for content management system, rather, I think it's important to understand, as I mentioned earlier, there's many people that are working with content across the company, and there are specific workflows that are really tied to make them effective. So I think on one hand, that's really where Contentful strength is. There is a content repository with a specific content model that you can build using our content modeling tools, and then the content management UI on top of that, which lets you manage all this content and really tie it into your existing processes. And then there's an API for developers who can then query that content that the content workers have entered, right, to build these experiences. And I think where Prisma now have pivoted, I think, so now they're not talking as much as GraphQL, but rather being an OR mapper on top of any type of database, right? And I think they are more a foundational piece, which is actually one level lower. So if you want to work with any type of data, not just editorial content, which Contentful is optimized around, Prisma is a good choice for that. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And as a company, you're very active in the open source community, right? You host meetups, you give webinars a lot of contributions back to open source. Is that coming from you and Sasha and the rest of the management team? It's just who you are, or is there business value in that? Explain why you've gone so far to make developers happy through open source.
I think this also comes back to being a headless system compared to traditional CMS, right? And what we're saying is that we really want to embrace the use of whatever technology that you want to build your head. And that's where we want to be active in the community to make sure that if you're a PHP developer or if you're a JavaScript developer, we really want to empower you to be able to build these experiences, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why we have been very active in the open source community to make sure that, once again, we have the right tools for developers in there, and they can also affect what they want to have by contributing to that open source library. And many of, as I mentioned, for example, with the GraphQL, we're starting up as an open source project really to see the interest and get feedback and input from the whole community before bringing it into the product. So definitely we really love being part of that open source community, and we think we can get so many good ideas and input from that community to take Contentful to the next level.
Yeah, and how do you foster that community? So besides just being active, are you doing anything explicitly to support that community? Do you license your IP, in a special open source license? Do you pay stipends? Do you have a summer of code for developers who want to do open source? What do you do besides just being involved?
Being involved, and also we have been as you mentioned, we've been hosting lots of meetups, which have been then mostly focusing on the open source community and not just content, but also other types of initiatives which we want to empower. And once again, this is part of our core wanted to be loved by developers. So what can we do really to empower developers? And then engaging inside the open source community has been a great way of doing that. That being said, I think we haven't open sourced parts of the delivery API, etc. It's still one thing that we're keeping as a service and something we really believe to have as a service. Whereas, for example, I mentioned the web app earlier, we're definitely talking about should we also open source our web app to make sure that developers can engage and come with suggestions and improvements for the web app as well.
Yeah. I mean, historically, CMSs have been bought by folks in marketing, right? The business users in marketing have budget. They can spend historically the millions of dollars. Developers haven't had those budgets. Developers have budgets for GitHub and more technical tools like that. So when you sell to an organization, what do you have for the marketer, and how do you get a CMO who has no idea what an API is to buy your product? How do you bridge that gap?
It's a good question. I think this is also something we see in terms of the maturity of the company that we're selling into. So if the digital maturity is high, and also the understanding for agile processes and how you really can become successful, it's an easier sell, because many of the foundations of Contentful is how you can move faster, how you're fitting into continuous integration for developers, etc. And then how we're satisfying the marketers. And this is something where, on one hand, the web app that we're providing in terms of how you're managing your content. We have a great web app already today where you're managing your content, and one of the core with the SaaS product, we can make sure that we're always providing new features and functionality to that web app. Since it's hosted in the cloud, right? And I think that's a really great way for us to work closely with marketers and authors and editors working with the web app, so we can have a really close relation with them to see their needs. And then the other important part of the spectrum is that content management is one thing, but to build your digital experience, you need other services as well. So how can we work well with, for example, marketing technology? So we have collaboration with Optimizely, where we're building the digital experience stack, which is really providing all these different services that's satisfying the other types of audiences, which is then marketers, it might be merchandisers, integrating with commerce tools, etc. So for us, it's really important building up that user experience for that persona is to connect all these different services, and how can we make sure that they can power content inside those.
So that's the DXS alliance you're talking about, right?
Yes, exactly.
And it'd be good if you could explain that for our audience, because I think it's a really fascinating alliance that's kind of popped up. So how does that work? What is it?
Yes, so on one hand, there's been a lot of talk in the market about the DXP, or digital experience platform, and this is also something that analysts have started talking about. What companies are providing a digital experience platform. And when they talk about the digital experience platform, they really mean like a platform that can cover the full customer lifecycle and create experiences, everything from driving, acquiring traffic to your website, making sure that you can sell your specific product, and when they have that product, you can provide support and best practices, etc. around it. So really following that customer journey. But when building up such a thing, there are so many things that are involved. It's content, it's commerce, it's personalization, it's targeting, it's optimization. There's so many services that you will need to be able to really create a great experience across that full life cycle, right? And we don't believe in a digital experience platform. We really believe in that companies should be able to select the best services that they need, and once again power these digital teams inside. And that's why we, in collaboration with Optimizely and Telium and others, and Amazon Web Services as well, how can we start forming something which is really enabling our products in a better way? So we're making sure that all these products are what I would argue is like very interoperable. So they can collaborate with all other systems, but how can we make sure that there is also a seamless experience for the business practitioners that's working across these systems, and start building those types of integrations, right? So that's what the digital experience alliance is about, to really forming something that can take care of the full digital experience across this customer journey.
What I really like about it is, if you look at the RFPs that come out of traditional enterprises, if you look at the analyst evaluations of your space, if you look at how the market generally looks at you, they very strongly favor suites.
Yeah.
Right? And we have the same problem at Commerce Tools. And we'll get an RFP for a commerce platform that does, 500 different business functions. Yeah. When in today's world, when you have SaaS, you can easily swap in and out these different services.
Yeah.
And what I like about DXS, and we're thinking about joining it as Commerce Tools, is you can then go with your Alliance members, and when you start responding to these sales inquiries and you have to fill out an RFP, you can say, yeah, Optimizely does the A/B testing, right? A commerce platform should not do that,
yeah.
right? Contentful does the content piece.
Yeah.
Commerce Tools does the commerce piece, right? Everybody has their place in that stack, and it kind of offers a way for smaller vendors to get together and really provide a solution to the buyers out there.
Yeah, and we really believe in that stack approach in terms of, okay, you're building your digital platform based on a set of different services that are suiting your needs best. And it also should be easy for you. If you want to use something else for A/B testing, it should be really easy for you to do that, right? So it's one of those things that, okay, we are providing a bit of a blueprint for you to be able to tackle the full digital experience. But if there is another tool that's working better for you, you should, of course, also be able to use that.
And what I also like about DXS is if you look in the founding documents, one of the principles is that the vendor should be easy to work with.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? And metered pricing, no contracts. I mean, there are a lot of commercial terms that are in DXS that companies like ours all, very much adhere to. And I would argue one of the biggest forms of technical debt is commercial, right? If you have license restrictions,
yep.
If you have huge contracts that go for 5 years, if you have and I think that companies like ours getting together and offering a new way of doing business is pretty refreshing to a lot of folks out there.
Yeah, I really like that part as well. And just, the thing we talked about earlier in terms of how fast can you try something out and evaluate it and see if it's working or not, and how can you launch a new initiative that's maybe using a different technology. I think that's really enabling lots of things, and then that comes to commercial terms, which then needs to be, it's not this lock-in. You're buying a huge platform with lots of functionality, you're using 10% of it, you realize after 1 year that you don't utilizing that 90%, but you still need to pay for it for 3 years, etc.
Yeah, it's frustrating. So how do you roadmap at Contentful?
I wish I would give you a simple answer to that, but this is also something that's been changing a lot as we've been growing. So as I mentioned, that we've been going from 30 people to 200 people, and also the product management or the product team has been growing from 2 people to 25 people. So there's been lots of changing in way we've been doing planning and how we've been executing on that. But to give you better ideas, on one hand, we have what we're calling strategic product drivers. So this is something that's always guiding us towards the vision, something that the product managers and the rest of the company should always have in the back of their head when they're thinking about how to map specific opportunity, if it's aligning with our drivers. And then we have an opportunity backlog, which is continuously updated during, daily, quarterly, monthly, so whatever. It should be something that's continuously updated that we can then use when we go into a yearly plan and we're thinking about high-level themes. So then the product team is really providing the big opportunity backlog for senior management to identify, being one of the input to senior management to identify specific themes that we want to set for the upcoming year. And then also based on the learnings and the insights we have in the market, the senior management is setting a high-level themes and focus areas. And based on that, it's really up then to the teams to map these different opportunities we're having towards those themes. And that eventually become the roadmap that we are building out.
That makes a lot of sense. And what's nice is SaaS vendors like us, we can release all the time because it's not like we have packaged software that you have to deploy and you have a big annual release. Things are coming out all the time. And it always helps to be able to change the roadmap in real time.
Yeah, and I think that's, on one hand, we want to be really outcome driven in most of the things we're doing, and we're not, even though we have a roadmap to be able to tell a story and see in which direction we're heading, as you said, based on learnings, based on findings that we do, we can definitely adjust the things in the roadmap. And the important things are, on one hand, the themes that we're focusing on, that we want to be aligned with those themes, but the specific things we're doing in there is really up for the different teams and the PM to decide.
Yeah. And what does your underlying platform look like? How did you build it? Where do you deploy it?
Yeah, I mean, so right now we have been focusing a lot on the continuous delivery ourselves, and we are divided into three bigger groups within product development. So on one hand, we have an infrastructure group, which is also then mostly responsible for the underlying infrastructure that the other teams are using in terms of how we put things to market, how we're going through really a staging process before putting it out into delivery, etc. But it's one of these things where I think as a company and being an API-centric company, we have always been having a rigorous process in terms of how do we roll out changes to the API, how we're making sure there's no break-in changes that's going out, etc. Has been a lot of quality and focus around that, and this is something that we also can use now when building up the practitioner experience and thinking about the quality is something that the teams always needs to consider. But really, the teams, we have this matter, you develop it and then you deploy it and you own it. So that's definitely something we're using here.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. So how is the tech scene in Berlin, right? And Berlin has a culture, especially in Europe, but for especially our American listeners and non-European listeners, how is it, and how is it different from like Silicon Valley, for example?
Yeah, on one hand, you're talking to dad of a 2 and a 4-year-old. So I wouldn't say that I've been really, part of the tech scene. That being said, I really love the Berlin tech scene. On one hand, it's you can feel there's lots of meetups going on. There's lots of different types of meetups. So it's what I like is that the tech scene in Berlin, I think, is also involving other aspects than just tech. So there is meetups in terms of personal growth. There's meetups in terms of how to think of a broader picture in terms of environment meetups, etc. So I think it's starting to span much more just outside the specific technical pieces of it. Yeah. And this is something I really like about the Berlin scene. It's really diverse, and there's lots of thinking and different perspectives coming into play here. And this is also something that you can see, at Commerce Tools and Contentful, there's a diverse set of people working at these companies. And this is really, on one hand, fostering a culture which is very open, but it's also can be very challenging at times. You have different perspectives on things, but rewarding when you actually bring in all these perspectives and you manage to get to a great outcome.
Yeah, and we see the same thing. If we look at how many nationalities we have represented, it's something like 40. I don't even know what it is, but you look at the vast majority of employees, and they're the best of the best in the world, and Germany just welcomes them. And it's a very established thing to get somebody in from Egypt or Turkey or, pick your country, South Africa, and they can come here very quickly, very little paperwork, and it's really a community of immigrants, people who are all coming together to build this great technology. And you just see there's an air of innovativeness, right? And I think what I find different is people aren't chasing money here. If you look at the Bay Area, there's very much a casino culture, right? How many options do I have? I want to pump it up as big as I can and then dump it, And here you don't see that. I think there's a lot more love of real technology, innovation, housing costs. Yeah, they're high, but they're not bad here. You can get a flat for 1,000 euros a month, 2,000. And you compare that to San Francisco, it doesn't even compare, right? So I love that dynamism, and just attending a meetup at a random office is just a cool experience that
that's true.
You don't see anywhere else.
And I've also, since I've been living in Stockholm for a long time, I usually compare Berlin to Stockholm. Stockholm is a beautiful town, and they sometimes try to create the roughness of Berlin, but it's always have these nice touches everywhere. Whereas in Berlin, you go in like, is this an office, or is it still the construction site? Sometimes hard to tell, right?
Yeah, it's very authentic. You want to call it that. But couldn't be happier to be part of the scene here. It's a lot of fun. So long term, where do you see the CMS and DXP market? So do you see the pure play CMSs going away and then they're being eclipsed by DXPs? And do you think headless solutions like Contentful are best for everyone? And I should preface that by saying in the commerce space, we see a lot of down market vendors like Shopify. There are a lot of folks out there who just want a website and a box. And that's not our market, right? We're at the enterprise space. And you are not necessarily a CMS in a box in ways that other vendors are. And you appeal better to enterprises and developers, people who want to build it themselves. So where do you see that market evolving? Do you see the traditional vendors going away, or?
If you look at Squarespace as an example, which I think is on the other end, is really a great tool for just setting up your own homepage, which works great for the restaurant in the corner, etc. And that's not where Contentful or this best of breed approach and forming your own stack. So I think that Contentful will fit very well into the companies that are betting on digital and want digital to be a core of their business, and therefore have technical people in-house.
Right.
If you don't have that, if you want to have a website on the side, it's not the core part of your business, there are many other platforms that are making more sense for you. That being said, I think we have quite a few full suite solutions today, and they are having currently a big foothold inside many enterprises, etc. I don't think they're going to go away. I think what we're going to start seeing is what you said earlier. There's going to be specific initiatives that's coming into these enterprises and start running these new types of services to build up these new experiences, right? But I really do believe that there will be more specialized services, but they're working better together. The integration is usually very tricky because even though you do a nice technical integration, the user experience might not be as good as we want it to be.
Yeah.
So I think that's where we have a long way to go before the best of breed approach is really taking over.
Yeah, I agree very much with you. And long term, where do you see your product heading?
There's the initial vision of Contentful was to become the content backbone for the internet. And the last few years, we've been focusing much more on the enterprise. And that's really where we're heading. And I see that there's so much to do in terms of... Contentful today is really bringing up these, what we call the digital teams. They can move really fast and iterate and build things, build new products, iterate on products really fast and scale that. And then I think there's another axis, which is more like the customer experience axis, building really sophisticated customer experiences. And this is where the companies such as Adobe and Episerver and Sitecore has been able really to provide great functionality for these practitioners to build these type of experiences. And I think the thing that will happen and where Contentful is going, how can we strike the right balance between the business and the practitioners and the moving fast, speed up delivery, etc., coming from developers. And when you find the right balance between those two, I think that's really where you get to really great outcome. And that's where we're getting at in terms of really where we're taking our product. How can we really bring a company together and collaborate? The technical people are collaborating with the business practitioners. That's where I think that the great outcomes will come from. And that's the focus for Contentful moving forward.
Wonderful. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you so much for joining us. Had a great time.
Thanks for having me, Kelly.
To all our listeners, thank you for tuning in, and please join us again for the next episode.